What if you were chosen by God, handpicked from all the people in the world to be a king? What if you were given power, fame, and a promise that your family would rule for generations? And what if, through your own choices, you lost it all? This is the story of a man who was given everything a person could ever want, and the heartbreaking story of how he was rejected by the very God who had lifted him up. Our story begins in a time of great change for the people of Israel. For many years, they had been led by special leaders called judges, men and women chosen by God to rescue them from their enemies. The last of these great judges was a man named Samuel. He was a prophet, someone who heard directly from God. From the time he was a small boy serving in God's house, Samuel had been faithful. He was wise, he was righteous, and the people loved and respected him. But Samuel was growing old. His hair was turning gray, and his steps were slower than they used to be. He had appointed his two sons, Joel and Abijah, to help him lead the people. But his sons were not like him. Their hearts were not pure. They saw their positions of power as a way to get rich. They took bribes, twisting justice for anyone who could pay them, and they ignored the cries of the poor. The people saw this, and a deep unease began to stir within them. They looked at the nations all around them. The Philistines, the Moabites, the Ammonites, all of them had kings. They had a single, powerful leader who rode at the front of their armies, a king with a golden crown and a grand palace. A king they could see and touch. They looked at their own situation, with an aging prophet and his corrupt sons, and fear began to grow in their hearts. What will happen to us when Samuel is gone? They whispered to one another. Who will lead us into battle? Who will protect us? The idea grew from a whisper to a murmur, and from a murmur to a demand. The elders of all the tribes of Israel gathered together. They traveled to Ramah, the town where Samuel lived. They stood before the old prophet, their faces set with determination. "You are old," they said to him, their words respectful but firm, "and your sons do not follow your ways. Now, we want you to appoint a king to lead us, just like all the other nations have." The words struck Samuel like a stone. He felt a deep sadness in his heart. For all these years, he had taught the people that God was their true king. God was the one who rescued them, who guided them, who protected them. To ask for a human king was like saying, "God, you are not enough for us." It was a rejection of the very one who had brought them out of slavery in Egypt and given them a land of their own. Samuel was deeply displeased. His heart ached for his people and for the God they were turning away from. He did the only thing he knew to do in times of trouble. He went away by himself to pray. He poured out his hurt and his confusion to the Lord. And in the quiet of that prayer, God spoke to him. His voice was not angry, but full of a sorrowful understanding. "Listen to all that the people are saying to you," God said. "It is not you they have rejected, Samuel. They have rejected me as their king." God knew the hearts of the people. He knew their fear and their desire to be like everyone else. He told Samuel to listen to their demand, but first, he was to give them a solemn warning. He was to tell them exactly what it would be like to have a human king. So Samuel went back to the elders. He gathered the people and spoke to them with the authority of God. His voice was heavy with the weight of his message. "This is what the king who will reign over you will do," he began, and a hush fell over the crowd. "He will take your sons. He will force them into his army, to serve with his chariots and his horsemen, and to run in front of his chariots. Some he will make commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s. He let the words sink in. He was talking about their children, their beloved boys who worked in the fields and cared for the flocks. He will take others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, Samuel continued, and still others to make his weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters, too. They will become his perfumers and cooks and bakers, serving in his palace." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. This did not sound like the glorious king they had imagined. "He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants," Samuel warned. "He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. He will take your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys for his own use. He will take 1/10 of your flocks." He paused, looking into their faces, pleading with them to understand. "And you yourselves," he said, his voice dropping to a somber whisper, "you will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." It was a terrifying picture, a warning of a future filled with loss, servitude, and regret. Samuel had laid it all out for them. He had shown them the true cost of their request. Surely now they would change their minds. Surely now they would turn back to God, their true and rightful king. But the people refused to listen. They had closed their ears to Samuel's warning and hardened their hearts. They shouted back at him, their voices united in a single, stubborn cry. "No," they yelled. "We want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles." Samuel heard their final answer. There was nothing more he could say. His shoulders slumped with the weight of their decision. He went back to God and told him what the people had said. And the Lord answered him, "Listen to them and give them a king." The decision was made. Israel would have its king. But this choice, born of fear and a desire to be like the world, had set them on a new and dangerous path. God had agreed to their demand, but a question now hung in the air, a question that would change the course of their history forever. Who could possibly be worthy of such a role? The search for Israel's first king would begin in the most unlikely of places, with a young man who had no idea that destiny was about to find him. Far away from the serious discussions in Ramah, in the land of the tribe of Benjamin, lived a man named Kish. He was, the scriptures tell us, a man of standing, and he had a son named Saul. Saul was not just any young man. He was remarkable. He was handsome, so much so that no one in all of Israel was more handsome than he. And he was tall. When he stood among other people, he was a head and shoulders taller than anyone else. But for all his impressive appearance, Saul had a humble heart. He was not seeking power or position. His life was simple, focused on his family and their farm. One day, some of the family's donkeys wandered off and got lost. This was a serious problem. Donkeys were valuable animals, essential for work and travel. Kish turned to his tall son. "Take one of the servants with you," he said, "and go and look for the donkeys." So Saul set out with the servant. It seemed like a simple task, but it would turn into a journey that would change his life forever. They walked through the hill country of Ephraim, scanning the rocky slopes and valleys. No donkeys. They passed through the land of Shalisha, then through the land of Shalim, their eyes searching every path and thicket. Still no donkeys. They journeyed on, through the territory of Benjamin, covering mile after dusty mile under the hot sun. They found nothing. They had been gone for days. Their supplies were low, and their hope was fading. They had come to the district of Zuph, far from home. Saul turned to his servant, his face lined with worry. "Let's go back," he said. "I'm worried my father will stop thinking about the donkeys and start worrying about us." Saul was ready to give up. He had done his best, but the task seemed impossible. But the servant had an idea. He was a man of faith, and he knew they were near a special town. "Look," he said, his voice full of hope. "In this town there is a man of God. He is highly respected, and everything he says comes true. Let's go there. Maybe he can tell us which way to go." Saul was hesitant. "But if we go," he said, "what can we give the man? The food in our sacks is gone. We have no gift to take to the man of God. What do we have?" It was customary to bring a small gift when seeking the help of a prophet. The servant reached into his pouch. "Look," he said, "I have a quarter of a shekel of silver. I will give it to the man of God so he will tell us what to do." It wasn't much, but it was something. "Good," Saul said, his hope renewed. "Let's go." So they started walking toward the town where the man of God lived. The town was built on a hill, and as they climbed the steep path, they saw some young women coming out to draw water from the well. "Is the seer here?" they asked. A seer was another name for a prophet, someone who could see things others could not. "He is," the young women replied, their voices cheerful. "He's ahead of you. Hurry now, he has just come to our town today, for the people have a sacrifice at the high place. As soon as you enter the town, you will find him before he goes up to the high place to eat. The people will not begin eating until he comes, because he must bless the sacrifice. Afterward, those who are invited will eat. Go up now. You should find him about this time." Saul and the servant thanked them and hurried on. They had no idea what they were walking into. They thought they were just looking for lost donkeys. But God had been preparing this moment all along. The day before Saul arrived, God had spoken to Samuel. "About this time tomorrow, the Lord had said, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him as ruler over my people Israel. He will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. I have looked on my people, for their cry has reached me." Samuel knew the king was coming. He just didn't know who it would be. As Saul and his servant entered the town, they saw a man coming toward them. It was Samuel. They didn't recognize him, of course. They just saw an older, distinguished man who looked like he knew his way around. Saul walked right up to him. "Would you please tell me where the seer's house is?" he asked politely. Samuel looked at the tall young man standing before him. He saw his height, his handsome face, and at that very moment, God whispered to Samuel's heart, "This is the man I spoke to you about." He is the one who will govern my people." A gentle smile touched Samuel's lips. "I am the seer," he replied. His voice was kind. "Go up ahead of me to the high place, for today you are to eat with me. I will send you on your way in the morning and will tell you all that is in your heart." Then, to put Saul's mind at ease, he added, "And as for the donkeys you lost 3 days ago, do not worry about them. They have been found." Saul must have blinked in surprise. How did this man know about his donkeys? How did he know what was in his heart? But Samuel wasn't finished. He looked Saul directly in the eye and said something that would have sounded absolutely crazy. "And to whom is all the desire of Israel turned, if not to you and your whole family line?" The desire of Israel? Saul was completely bewildered. What is he talking about? He must have thought. He stammered in reply, "But I am a Benjamite, from the smallest tribe of Israel, and my clan is the least of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin. Why would you say such a thing to me?" He was just a farmer's son, looking for lost animals. This made no sense. Samuel didn't explain. He simply led Saul and his servant to the hall where the feast was being held. There were about 30 people there, the most important guests in the town. Samuel did something shocking. He took Saul, this unknown young man from the country, and his servant, and he gave them the most honored seats at the head of the table. Then Samuel turned to the cook. "Bring the piece of meat I gave you," he said, "the one I told you to set aside." The cook brought the special portion, the leg, and set it before Saul. This was the choicest piece, reserved for the guest of honor. "Eat," Samuel said to him. "This was set aside for you for this occasion, from the time I said, 'I have invited guests.'" Saul ate the meal, surrounded by strangers who were all watching him, wondering who this tall young man was that the great prophet Samuel was honoring so highly. His mind must have been spinning. Just that morning, he had been a weary traveler, ready to give up his search. Now he was the guest of honor at a sacred feast, being told that all of Israel desired him. After the meal, they went down from the high place and back into the town. Samuel had a bed prepared for Saul on the flat roof of his house, a cool and quiet place to sleep under the stars. Saul lay there, the strange and powerful words of the prophet echoing in his mind. What did it all mean? At the crack of dawn, Samuel called up to him on the roof. "Get ready, and I will send you on your way." Saul got up, and he and Samuel went out into the quiet streets of the sleeping town. As they reached the edge of town, Samuel said to Saul, "Tell the servant to go on ahead of us." The servant walked on, leaving them alone. Then Samuel said, "But you stay here for a while, so that I may give you a message from God." The air was still. The world was quiet. It was just the old prophet and the young farmer's son. Samuel took out a small flask of olive oil. He held it up. The early morning light caught the golden liquid. Then he did something that would seal Saul's destiny. He poured the oil over Saul's head. The cool oil ran down through his hair, a sacred act of anointing. Then Samuel leaned in and kissed him. "Has not the Lord anointed you ruler over his inheritance?" he said. The words were a statement, a fact. This was God's doing. Saul stood there, stunned into silence. He, Saul, the son of Kish, from the smallest tribe, was to be the ruler of all of Israel. It was too much to comprehend. Samuel, seeing the confusion on his face, gave him 3 signs to prove that what was happening was real. "First," he said, "when you leave me today, you will meet 2 men near Rachel's tomb. They will tell you, 'The donkeys you went to look for have been found.' And now your father has stopped thinking about them and is worried about you. He is asking, 'What shall I do about my son?' Second," Samuel continued, "you will go on from there until you reach the great tree of Tabor. 3 men going up to worship God at Bethel will meet you there. One will be carrying 3 young goats, another 3 loaves of bread, and another a skin of wine. They will greet you and offer you 2 loaves of bread, which you will accept from them. And third," Samuel said, his eyes intense, "after that you will go to Gibeah of God, where there is a Philistine outpost. As you approach the town, you will meet a procession of prophets coming down from the high place, playing lyres, tambourines, pipes, and harps, and they will be prophesying. And then, Saul, the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you in power, and you will prophesy with them, and you will be changed into a different person." He gave Saul one final instruction. "Once these signs are fulfilled, do whatever your hand finds to do, for God is with you. Then go down ahead of me to Gilgal. I will surely come down to you to sacrifice burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. But you must wait 7 days until I come to you and tell you what you are to do." Saul's head was reeling. It was all happening so fast. He had a secret now, a glorious and terrifying secret. He was the king chosen by God. As Saul turned to leave Samuel, the Bible tells us that God changed Saul's heart. A new sense of purpose, a new spirit, began to stir within him. And just as Samuel had said, all the signs came true that very day. He met the 2 men who told him the donkeys were found. He met the 3 men who gave him the 2 loaves of bread. And as he approached his hometown of Gibeah, he saw the prophets coming toward him, lost in joyful worship. Suddenly, the Spirit of God rushed upon him. He began to prophesy along with them. People from his town who knew him saw it happen. They were amazed. They turned to each other in confusion. "What is this that has happened to the son of Kish?" they asked. "Is Saul also among the prophets?" Saul, the quiet young man they all knew, was acting like a man filled with the power of God. He was changed. When Saul's uncle saw him, he asked, "Where have you been?" Saul told him about the search for the donkeys and how they had gone to see Samuel. His uncle was curious. "Tell me," he said, "what did Samuel say to you?" Saul replied, "He assured us that the donkeys had been found." But he did not tell his uncle or anyone else about the anointing. He didn't say a word about what Samuel had told him concerning the kingdom. Saul had a secret. He was the chosen king. But would the nation ever accept a man nobody knew? The time had come for the secret to be revealed. Samuel called all the people of Israel to gather before the Lord at a place called Mizpah. The tribes assembled, a vast sea of people, buzzing with anticipation. They knew why they were there. Today, their king would be chosen. Samuel stood before them. He reminded them once again of all that God had done for them, how he had saved them from Egypt and from all the kingdoms that had oppressed them. "But you have now rejected your God," he said, his voice ringing with sorrow and disappointment. "You have said, 'No,' set a king over us. So now, present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and clans." The ceremony began. It was to be a sacred selection, guided not by human choice, but by the casting of lots. This ancient practice was how Israel sought to know God's will. The tension was thick as the lots were cast. First, the tribe was chosen. The lot fell on the tribe of Benjamin. A murmur went through the crowd. The king would come from the smallest of the 12 tribes. Next, they cast the lots for the clans within Benjamin. The lot fell on the clan of Matri. The circle was getting smaller. Finally, they cast the lot for the man within that family. The lot fell on one name, Saul, son of Kish. Saul. It is Saul. The name rippled through the assembly. People looked around, searching for the man who had been chosen. Where was he? They looked for him among his family, among the leaders, in the crowd. But Saul was nowhere to be found. He was gone. The man chosen by God to be king had disappeared at the very moment of his unveiling. What's happened? The people wondered. Where did he go? They asked the Lord again, "Is the man here yet?" And the Lord answered, "Yes. He has hidden himself among the supplies." Saul, overwhelmed by the moment, had run away and was cowering behind the baggage and equipment stacked at the edge of the camp. He was terrified. He was just a farmer's son. How could he possibly be king over all these people? They ran and found him there, hiding. They brought him out, and he stood in the middle of the assembly. And everyone gasped. He was so tall, so impressive. He stood a head and shoulders above everyone else. Samuel's voice boomed across the crowd. "Do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him among all the people." And then a great roar went up from the people. Their doubts and the strange disappearance were forgotten. All they saw was this magnificent man who looked every bit the king they had dreamed of. They shouted with one voice, "Long live the king!" Samuel then explained to the people the regulations of the kingship. He wrote them down on a scroll and placed it before the Lord. Then he sent everyone home. Saul, now the proclaimed king, also went back to his home in Gibeah. And with him went a group of valiant men whose hearts God had touched. They would be his first followers, his royal guard. But not everyone was happy. Some troublemakers sneered. "How can this fellow save us?" they said. They looked down on him because of his humble background. They showed him no respect and brought him no gifts to honor him as king. But Saul, in his new wisdom, held his peace. He said nothing. He was king. But his first true test was just around the corner, and it would be a test of life or death for an entire city. About a month later, a fearsome enemy marched against Israel. Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, led his army to the Israelite town of Jabesh-Gilead on the other side of the Jordan River. He surrounded the city, cutting it off from any help. The people of Jabesh were terrified. They knew they could not defeat the powerful Ammonite army. In desperation, the men of Jabesh sent a message to Nahash. "Make a treaty with us," they pleaded, "and we will be subject to you." They were willing to become his servants to save their lives. But Nahash was a cruel and arrogant king. He wanted not just to conquer them, but to humiliate them and all of Israel. He sent back a chilling reply. I will make a treaty with you on one condition only, that I gouge out the right eye of every one of you, and so bring disgrace on all Israel. The elders of Jabesh were horrified. The thought of such a brutal, shameful punishment was unbearable. They begged for time. Give us 7 days, they said, so we can send messengers throughout Israel. If no one comes to rescue us, we will surrender to you. Nahash, confident that no one could stand against him, agreed. Messengers ran from Jabesh, spreading the terrible news. They came to Gibeah, Saul's hometown, and told the people what was happening. As the people heard the cruel demands of Nahash, a great wail of sorrow and despair rose up. They wept loudly, feeling helpless. There was nothing they could do. Just then, Saul was coming in from the fields, walking behind his oxen. He had gone back to his old life, waiting for the right moment to act as king. He heard the sound of weeping and saw the distress on everyone's faces. What is the matter with the people? He asked. Why are they weeping? They told him the news from Jabesh Gilead. As Saul heard the story of their plight and the enemy's arrogance, something ignited within him. The Spirit of God came upon him in power, just as it had before. But this time, it was not for prophesying. It was for battle. A burning anger, a righteous fury, filled him. He took a pair of oxen and cut them into pieces. Then he gave the pieces to messengers and sent them throughout all the territory of Israel with a fierce command. This is what will be done to the oxen of anyone who does not follow Saul and Samuel into battle. It was a shocking, dramatic call to arms. And it worked. The terror of the Lord fell on the people. They understood the urgency and the authority in Saul's command. They came out as one man, from every tribe, their hearts united. Saul mustered them at a place called Bezek. There were 300,000 men from Israel, and another 30,000 from the tribe of Judah. A massive army had appeared as if from nowhere, all because of the decisive action of their new king. Saul sent a message back to the desperate people of Jabesh. Tell the men of Jabesh Gilead, he commanded, by the time the sun is hot tomorrow, you will be delivered. When the messengers arrived with this news, the hearts of the people in Jabesh were filled with joy. They sent a clever message to Nahash the Ammonite. Tomorrow we will surrender, and you can do to us whatever you like. They were setting a trap. Nahash and his army relaxed, confident of their victory. They expected a quiet surrender the next day, but Saul was already on the move. He marched his army all through the night. In the darkness of the early morning, just before dawn, they fell upon the Ammonite camp. Saul had divided his forces into 3 companies, attacking from different directions at once. The Ammonites were taken completely by surprise. The attack was swift, ferocious, and overwhelming. The Israelites fought with a courage and unity they had not known for years. They routed the enemy completely. The slaughter continued until the heat of the day. The Ammonite soldiers who survived were so scattered that no 2 of them were left together. It was a stunning, decisive victory. Saul had saved the city of Jabesh and defended the honor of Israel. The people were overjoyed. Their king had proven himself. He was not just a tall farmer's son. He was a mighty warrior, a true leader chosen by God. In the excitement of the victory, the people turned to Samuel. Their loyalty to Saul was now absolute. They remembered the troublemakers who had sneered at him. Where are the men who said, "Shall this man reign over us?" They demanded. Bring them here, and we will put them to death. But Saul showed his wisdom and grace. He raised his hand for silence. No one will be put to death today, he declared. For this day the Lord has worked salvation in Israel. He refused to let the celebration be spoiled by revenge. He gave all the glory to God. Samuel saw that the people's hearts were finally united behind their king. Come, he said, let us go to Gilgal and there renew the kingship. So all the people went to Gilgal. It was the very place where Saul was told to wait for Samuel, a place of deep significance. There, before the Lord, they confirmed Saul as their king. They offered fellowship offerings, and a great celebration began. Saul and all the Israelites rejoiced greatly. Saul was a hero, a true king. He had the love of the people and the clear blessing of God. It seemed that his reign was off to a perfect start, that nothing could possibly go wrong. But a king's greatest enemy is often found not on the battlefield against a foreign foe, but in the quiet battles of his own heart. And a test was coming that would challenge not his courage, but his obedience. 2 years passed. Saul was now established as king. He had a small, professional army of 3,000 men. 2,000 were with him, and 1,000 were with his brave and adventurous son, Jonathan. The greatest threat to Israel was still the Philistines. They were a powerful, well-armed people who controlled much of the land and had garrisons or military outposts in Israelite territory. Jonathan, full of faith and courage, decided to take action. He led his 1,000 men and attacked the Philistine outpost at Geba. It was a bold move, a direct challenge to Philistine authority, and the Philistines were enraged. When they heard what had happened, they assembled a massive army to crush the Israelites once and for all. The numbers were terrifying. They had 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They marched up and camped at Michmash, east of Beth-aven. When the men of Israel saw the size of the Philistine army, they were struck with sheer terror. All the confidence from the victory at Jabesh-Gilead vanished. They ran for their lives. They hid in caves and thickets, among the rocks, and in pits and cisterns. They were like frightened animals scattering before a predator. Some even fled across the Jordan River to safety. Saul's own army began to melt away. The soldiers who stayed with him at Gilgal were quaking with fear. The situation was desperate. This was the moment Saul had been waiting for, the moment Samuel had foretold. He was at Gilgal, the place of the appointment. And Samuel had given him a clear instruction: "You must wait 7 days until I come to you and tell you what you are to do." The plan was for Samuel to come and offer sacrifices to God, to seek his favor before the battle. So Saul waited. The first day passed. The shadow of the massive Philistine army loomed on the horizon. More of his soldiers slipped away into the night. The second day. The third. The fear was a living thing in the camp. The men looked at Saul, their eyes wide with panic. "What are we doing? We're all going to die." The fourth day. The fifth. The sixth. Still no sign of Samuel. Saul could feel his control slipping. The army was dissolving before his eyes. He paced back and forth, his knuckles white. Where is he? Why isn't he here? The pressure was immense. He was the king. He had to do something. His men were looking to him for leadership, for action. The seventh day arrived. The final day of the waiting period. Saul scanned the horizon from dawn till mid-morning. Samuel was not there. More soldiers deserted. Saul made a decision. It was a decision born of fear and impatience. He could not wait any longer. "He's late," Saul reasoned. "The people are scattering. The Philistines are closing in. I have to act now. I must seek the Lord's favor myself." He gave the order, "Bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings." And Saul, the king, a man from the tribe of Benjamin, took it upon himself to perform the sacred duty of a priest. He stepped up to the altar and offered the burnt offering. It was a direct violation of God's command. Only the priests, the Levites, and specifically Samuel in this case, were authorized to perform this holy ritual. And just as he finished making the offering, just as the smoke was rising from the altar, Samuel arrived. He saw what Saul had done. His face was grim. "What have you done?" Samuel asked, his voice low and full of a terrible disappointment. Saul began to make excuses, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I saw that the men were scattering," he said, trying to justify his actions. "And you did not come at the set time, and the Philistines were assembling at Michmash. I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the Lord's favor. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering." He blamed the circumstances. He blamed Samuel for being late. He blamed his own feelings of being compelled. Samuel listened, his heart breaking. He looked at the king, the man he had anointed with such hope, and delivered a devastating verdict. "You have done a foolish thing," Samuel said, his words cutting through Saul's excuses. "You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time." Saul's blood must have run cold. He had been promised a lasting dynasty, a kingdom forever. And now? But now, Samuel continued, and the words were like a death sentence, "Your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command." With that, Samuel turned and left Gilgal. Saul was left standing there, the smell of the unlawful sacrifice still in the air. He was left with only 600 men, a tiny, terrified band against a mighty Philistine horde. And he was left with Samuel's words echoing in his mind, a constant, chilling reminder of his failure. His kingdom would not last. He was still the king, he still wore the crown, but now a shadow hung over his throne. He had failed the test of patience. And his next test, a final chance to prove his loyalty, would demand something even more difficult: complete and total obedience. Some time passed. Saul had some military successes, but the verdict of God still hung over him. Then, one day, Samuel came to him with a new message, a direct command from the Lord. It was a chance for Saul to show that he had learned his lesson, a chance to redeem himself. "This is what the Lord Almighty says," Samuel began, his tone serious and direct. "I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt." The Amalekites were an ancient and wicked enemy of God's people. They had attacked the Israelites in the wilderness when they were weak and vulnerable. God had promised long ago that he would blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Now, the time for that judgment had come. The command God gave to Saul was specific, absolute, and severe. "Now go," Samuel instructed, "attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys." The instruction could not have been clearer. The Hebrew word used was harem, which means to devote something completely to destruction as a sacred act of judgment for God. Nothing was to be left. No exceptions. No compromises. This was not a war for plunder or for taking slaves. It was an act of divine justice, and Saul was to be the instrument. Saul acted quickly. He summoned his army, a massive force of 200,000 foot soldiers, plus 10,000 men from Judah. He marched to the city of Amalek and set an ambush in the ravine. He even showed a measure of wisdom, warning a friendly tribe, the Kenite, to move away from the area so they would not be caught up in the destruction. Then he attacked. Saul and his army completely defeated the Amalekites, fighting them all the way from Havilah to Shur. The victory was total. The mission seemed to be a success, but it was not. In the midst of the victory, Saul made a fateful choice. He and his soldiers looked at the spoils of war. They saw the king of the Amalekites, Agag, a powerful and important captive, and they saw the livestock. They saw the strong, healthy sheep, the fat cattle, the best of everything. And greed, or perhaps a desire for a great victory parade, entered their hearts. They decided to ignore part of God's clear command. The Bible says, "But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and lambs, everything that was good." They were unwilling to destroy them. They only destroyed what was despised and weak. They decided that their judgment was better than God's. They would keep the best for themselves. That night, the word of the Lord came to a grieving Samuel. "I regret that I have made Saul king," God said, his voice filled with sorrow, "because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions." Samuel was heartbroken. He cried out to the Lord all through the night. The next morning, a heavy-hearted Samuel set out to find Saul. He was told that Saul had gone to Carmel, a mountain in the south. And what had he done there? He had set up a monument to himself, a monument to celebrate his own victory. His pride was on full display. From there, he had gone down to Gilgal. Samuel journeyed to Gilgal, the very place of Saul's first great failure. As he approached the camp, he heard a sound that made his stomach clench. It was the sound of disobedience. He could hear the bleating of sheep and the lowing of cattle. Saul came out to meet him, his face beaming with pride. He greeted the old prophet cheerfully. "The Lord bless you," he said. "I have carried out the Lord's command." He said it with a straight face, as if he truly believed it. He had convinced himself that what he had done was good enough. But Samuel could not be fooled. His eyes, filled with the grief of God, looked straight through Saul's cheerful mask. He asked a simple, devastating question. "What then," he said, his voice quiet but sharp as a razor, "is this bleating of sheep in my ears? What is this lowing of cattle that I hear?" Saul was caught. He immediately started to make excuses, just as he had done before. And just as before, he blamed others. "The soldiers brought them from the Amalekites," he said, pointing the finger at his own men. "They spared the best of the sheep and cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but we totally destroyed the rest." It was a clever-sounding excuse. They weren't being greedy. They were being pious. They were saving the best animals to worship God. But it was a lie, a cover-up for their disobedience. "Enough," Samuel commanded. His patience was gone. "Let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night." "Tell me," Saul said, his confidence beginning to crumble. "Although you were once small in your own eyes," Samuel began, reminding Saul of his humble beginnings, "did you not become the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and he sent you on a mission, saying, 'Go and completely destroy those wicked people, the Amalekites. Wage war against them until you have wiped them out.' Why did you not obey the Lord? Why did you pounce on the plunder, and do evil in the eyes of the Lord. Even then, Saul tried to argue. But I did obey the Lord, he insisted. I went on the mission he assigned me. I completely destroyed the Amalekites and brought back Agag their king. The soldiers took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God at Gilgal. He still didn't get it. He thought that bringing back the enemy king was a sign of victory. He thought that a good religious-sounding reason could excuse his direct disobedience. Then Samuel spoke the words that would echo through history, words that laid bare the heart of God. Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the voice of the Lord? He asked. The question hung in the air, a piercing indictment of Saul's entire way of thinking. To obey, Samuel declared, his voice ringing with divine authority, is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. He was telling Saul that his disobedience was as bad as witchcraft, and his pride was as bad as worshipping a false god. Saul had set up his own will, his own judgment, as an idol, and he had bowed down to it instead of to the command of God. And then came the final, soul-crushing verdict. The words that confirmed the judgment from years before. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. The truth finally hit Saul. The full weight of his failure crashed down upon him. There were no more excuses. I have sinned, he confessed, his voice breaking. I violated the Lord's command and your instructions. I was afraid of the people, so I gave in to them. He admitted his sin, but even then, his reason was fear of man, not sorrow for offending God. Now I beg you, forgive my sin and come back with me, so that I may worship the Lord. But it was too late. The rejection was final. I will not go back with you, Samuel said firmly. You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you as king over Israel. As Samuel turned to leave, Saul panicked. In a desperate, last-ditch effort to stop him, he reached out and grabbed the hem of Samuel's robe. He held on so tightly that the fabric tore in his hand. Samuel looked from the torn robe to the desperate king. The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, he said, using the powerful image of what had just happened. And he has given it to one of your neighbors, to one better than you. He who is the glory of Israel does not lie or change his mind, for he is not a human being, that he should change his mind. The decision was irreversible. Saul begged again, this time not for forgiveness, but for his reputation. Please, he pleaded, at least honor me before the elders of my people and before Israel. Come back with me, so that I may worship the Lord your God. He was more concerned with how he looked than with the state of his heart. Samuel, perhaps out of pity, agreed to this one last request and went back with him. After Saul had worshipped, Samuel commanded, bring me Agag, king of the Amalekites. Agag came, thinking he had escaped death. But Samuel, acting as the instrument of God's justice that Saul had failed to be, pronounced judgment upon him and put him to death. Then Samuel went to his home in Ramah, and Saul went to his in Gibeah. And the Bible tells us that Samuel never went to see Saul again for the rest of his life. But he mourned for him. He grieved for the king who could have been, for the man who had been given so much and had thrown it all away. Rejected. The word was a final judgment. God had chosen another. Though Saul still wore the crown and sat on the throne, he was a king in name only. He was a hollow man, ruling a kingdom that was no longer his. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a dark, tormenting spirit sent by the Lord began to trouble him, while the Spirit of God quietly departed to find its new home in the heart of a young shepherd boy. While Samuel mourned for Saul, God had already moved on. The Lord said to the grieving prophet, How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king. So Samuel, hiding his true mission from the suspicious and jealous King Saul, traveled to Bethlehem. He took a heifer with him, saying he had come to make a sacrifice, to keep his journey a secret. When he arrived, the elders of the town trembled, afraid that the great prophet's visit meant trouble. But he assured them he came in peace and invited them and Jesse's family to the sacrifice. When Jesse and his sons arrived, Samuel saw the oldest, a tall and impressive young man named Eliab. Samuel looked at him and thought, Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. Eliab looked like a king. But the Lord spoke to Samuel's heart, correcting him with a lesson for all time. Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. One by one, Jesse had his sons pass before Samuel. Abinadab, Shammah, 7 of his sons in all. And with each one, Samuel shook his head. The Lord has not chosen these. Samuel was confused. He turned to Jesse. Are these all the sons you have? There is still the youngest, Jesse replied, almost as an afterthought. He is tending the sheep. The youngest son wasn't even considered important enough to be invited to the feast. Send for him, Samuel commanded. We will not sit down to eat until he arrives. So they sent for him. A young boy was brought in from the fields, his face flushed from the sun, his eyes bright and full of life. The Bible says he was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. His name was David. And the Lord said to Samuel, Rise and anoint him. He is the one. So Samuel took the horn of oil he had brought and, in front of his stunned father and brothers, he anointed the young shepherd boy. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Samuel then returned to his home, his secret mission complete. A new king had been chosen. Meanwhile, in the royal palace at Gibeah, a terrible darkness was descending upon Saul. With the Spirit of God gone, he was left empty, and a harmful, tormenting spirit sent from the Lord began to afflict him. He was filled with depression, paranoia, and fits of rage. He was miserable, a king haunted by his past and terrified of his future. His servants, seeing his distress, came to him with a suggestion. See, an evil spirit from God is tormenting you, they said. Let our Lord command his servants here to search for someone who can play the lyre. He will play when the evil spirit from God comes on you, and you will feel better. Saul, desperate for any relief, agreed. Find me someone who plays well and bring him to me. One of the servants spoke up. I have seen a son of Jesse of Bethlehem who knows how to play the lyre, he said. He is a brave man and a warrior. He speaks well and is a fine-looking man. And the Lord is with him. So Saul sent messengers to Jesse. Send me your son David, who is with the sheep. And so, in one of history's great ironies, the new anointed king was brought into the court of the old, rejected king. David came to Saul and entered his service. Saul liked him very much, and David became one of his armor-bearers. Whenever the tormenting spirit came upon Saul, David would take his lyre and play. The beautiful, spirit-filled music would soothe Saul's troubled soul, and the evil spirit would leave him. The rejected king found his only peace in the presence of the man God had chosen to replace him. The future king was now serving the rejected king, a secret known only to God, Samuel, and David himself. But their paths were about to cross on a battlefield where a giant's challenge would change everything and reveal to all of Israel the true heart of a king. The Philistines gathered their forces for war once again. They camped on one hill, and the Israelites, led by King Saul, camped on another, with the valley of Elah between them. But this was not a normal battle. For 40 days, a single warrior from the Philistine camp had paralyzed the entire Israelite army with fear. His name was Goliath. He was a giant, over 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet and a coat of scale armor that weighed 125 pounds. He had bronze greaves on his legs and a bronze javelin slung on his back. The shaft of his spear was as thick as a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 15 pounds. Every morning and every evening, he would stride out and shout his challenge to the armies of Israel. Choose a man and have him come down to me, he would roar, his voice echoing across the valley. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man and let us fight each other. On hearing his words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Their king, the one who was supposed to lead them into battle, the man who stood head and shoulders above everyone else, cowered in his tent along with his men. Into this scene of fear came young David. His father Jesse had sent him to the battle lines to bring food for his older brothers and to see how they were doing. As David was talking to his brothers, Goliath came forward and shouted his usual defiance. David heard it, and he saw the Israelite soldiers run away in great fear. David was shocked. But he wasn't shocked by the giant's size. He was shocked by his words. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? He asked the men standing near him. His faith was an offense to those who had none. His own brother Eliab angrily accused him of being proud and conceited. But David's words were overheard and reported to Saul. The king sent for him. David stood before the tall, fearful king and said with simple, stunning confidence, Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. Saul looked at the young shepherd boy. "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him," he said. "You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." David replied by telling Saul how he had defended his father's sheep from lions and bears. "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul, perhaps with a flicker of his old self, looked at the boy's unshakable faith and said, "Go, and the Lord be with you." He tried to put his own royal armor on David, his own bronze helmet and coat of mail. But they were too big and unfamiliar. David took them off. He took his shepherd's staff, went to the stream, and chose 5 smooth stones. With his sling in his hand, he went to face the giant. Goliath looked at David and laughed with contempt. "Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks?" he sneered. "Come here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David shouted back, his voice ringing with the power of God. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." David ran forward, put a stone in his sling, and let it fly. The stone sank into the giant's forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. David had defeated the champion with a sling and a stone. The Philistines, seeing their hero fall, turned and ran. The Israelite army, their courage restored, roared to life and chased after them, winning a great victory. David became an instant hero. When the victorious army returned, women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing. They sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." Saul heard the song, and it ignited a fire in his soul. But it was not a fire of joy. It was the dark, consuming fire of jealousy. "They have credited David with tens of thousands," he muttered to himself, "but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom?" And from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. The very next day, the tormenting spirit came upon Saul with violent force. He was raving in his house. David, as usual, was playing his lyre. Saul was holding a spear. Suddenly, in a fit of jealous rage, Saul hurled the spear straight at David, intending to pin him to the wall. But David eluded him, and the spear stuck quivering in the wall. David fled and escaped. Saul was now afraid of David. He was terrified of him, because he could see that the Lord was with David, but had departed from him. So he sent David away from the palace, making him a commander over 1,000 men. He hoped David would be killed in battle. But David was successful in everything he did, because the Lord was with him. And the more successful David became, the more afraid and jealous Saul grew. He tried to trap David by offering him his older daughter, Merab, as a wife, but then gave her to another man. Then he learned his younger daughter, Michal, was in love with David. Saul saw another opportunity. "I will give her to him," he thought, "so that she may be a snare to him, and so that the hand of the Philistines may be against him." He demanded a bride price not of money, but of 100 Philistine foreskins, a gruesome and dangerous task, fully expecting David to be killed trying to get them. But David and his men killed 200 Philistines and brought back the proof. So Saul had to give him his daughter Michal in marriage. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that his own daughter loved him, he became even more afraid. His jealousy turned into a fixed, obsessive hatred. Saul became David's enemy for the rest of his life. He openly told his son Jonathan and all his attendants to kill David. But Jonathan loved David like a brother and warned him. Jonathan even reasoned with his father, reminding Saul of all the good David had done. For a moment, Saul seemed to listen. He made an oath, "As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death." But the peace did not last. War broke out again, and David won another great victory. When he returned, the tormenting spirit again seized Saul as David was playing the lyre. Saul tried once more to pin him to the wall with his spear, but David eluded him and escaped into the night. Saul's paranoia spiraled out of control. He hunted David relentlessly, chasing him through the hills and deserts of Judah like a common criminal. He became obsessed with destroying the young man God had blessed. Twice, David had the opportunity to kill Saul. Once, in a dark cave at En-Gedi, David secretly cut off a corner of Saul's robe while the king was vulnerable. Another time, he snuck into Saul's camp at night and took the spear and water jug from right beside the sleeping king's head. Both times, David spared Saul's life, showing mercy and proving that he would not lift his hand against the Lord's anointed, even a rejected one. But Saul's heart was too hard to be changed by mercy. His path was set. His descent into darkness was almost complete. Years of running, hiding, and fighting passed. The Philistines saw the division in Israel and gathered their armies for one last, massive battle. They camped at Shunem. Saul gathered all Israel and camped on the nearby Mount Gilboa. When Saul saw the Philistine army, a vast and powerful force, he was terrified. Terror filled his heart. He was completely alone. Samuel was dead. David, his greatest warrior, had been driven away. And now, God was silent. Saul desperately sought guidance from the Lord, but there was no answer, not by dreams, not by the Urim and Thummim, not by the prophets. The heavens were like brass. In his utter desperation, Saul made a final, terrible choice. He decided to turn to the very darkness he himself had outlawed. Early in his reign, he had expelled all the mediums and spiritists from the land in obedience to God's law. Now, in his darkest hour, he would break that law himself. He disguised himself, putting on other clothes, and took 2 men with him. Under the cover of night, they went to a woman who lived in a town called Endor. She was a medium, a witch. Saul went to her and said, "I need you to consult a spirit for me. Bring up the one I name." The woman was suspicious. "Surely you know what Saul has done," she said. "He has cut off the mediums and spiritists from the land. Why are you setting a trap for my life to bring about my death?" Saul swore an oath to her. "As surely as the Lord lives, you will not be punished for this." The woman, reassured, asked, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" And Saul spoke the name of the man he had once listened to, then rejected, and now missed with a desperate longing. "Bring up Samuel for me," he whispered. When the woman saw the spiritual form that appeared, she cried out at the top of her voice. She knew at once who her visitor was. "Why have you deceived me?" she shrieked at Saul. "You are Saul. Don't be afraid," the king said, his voice trembling. "What do you see?" "I see a ghostly figure coming up out of the earth," she said. "What does he look like?" "He is an old man wearing a robe," she replied. Then Saul knew it was Samuel. He bowed low, with his face to the ground. The spirit of Samuel spoke, and his words were not of comfort, but of pure and final doom. "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Saul's voice was filled with anguish. "I am in great distress," he cried. "The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has departed from me. He no longer answers me. That is why I have called on you to tell me what to do." Samuel's reply was chilling and absolute. "Why do you consult me, now that the Lord has departed from you and has become your enemy? The Lord has done what he predicted through me. The Lord has torn the kingdom from your hands and given it to your neighbor, to David. Because you did not obey the Lord or carry out his fierce wrath against the Amalekites, the Lord has done this to you today." And then came the final prophecy, the final nail in the coffin of Saul's hope. "The Lord will deliver both Israel and you into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me." At these words, Saul collapsed. He fell full length on the ground, overcome with terror. There was no strength left in him. He had not eaten all day and all night. There was no hope left. There would be no divine rescue. His fate was sealed. The next morning, Saul, the first king of Israel, would march into his final battle, not as a confident warrior, but as a condemned man, walking knowingly toward his end. The sun rose over Mount Gilboa. The air was thick with the dust of marching armies and the grim promise of battle. Saul, with the ghost of Samuel's prophecy haunting his every step, led his army to face the Philistines. The battle was fierce from the very start. The Philistine army pressed hard, and the men of Israel broke ranks and fled. The Philistines pursued them, cutting them down as they ran up the slopes of the mountain. The fighting was especially brutal around King Saul and his sons. One by one, Saul saw his sons fall. Jonathan, the brave and loyal friend of David. Abinadab, Malchishua. The arrows of the Philistines found them, and they were struck down. Saul's heart, already broken by God's rejection, was now shattered by the loss of his children. The Philistine archers closed in on the king himself. They recognized him, the tall king of Israel, and concentrated their fire. An arrow found its mark. Saul was critically wounded, the pain searing through him. He knew the end was near. He looked at his young armor-bearer, the man who carried his weapons. "Draw your sword and run me through," Saul gasped, his breath coming in ragged bursts. "Or these uncircumcised fellows will come and run me through and abuse me." He could not bear the thought of being captured, tortured, and humiliated by his enemies. But his armor-bearer was terrified. He could not bring himself to lift his hand against his king, the Lord's anointed. He refused. Seeing that his last request was denied, Saul knew what he had to do. With the last of his strength, he took his own sword. He placed the hilt on the rocky ground and pointed the tip toward his heart. Then he fell on it.